Well, our passage this morning, as Autumn mentioned, is about something that all of us actually want and crave. It's actually probably something that we all think we inherently have just by being born as a human. It's probably, we think, just basic to our human right, and that is the topic of freedom. Now, as Americans who live in the land of the free, we tend to think that we live in probably the freest place in the world, at maybe the freest time in our history. So for me and my story, I've lived in 3 different places for most of my life in the United States. So I grew up in the north suburbs of Chicago, go Cubs, and I had to just once. And Chicago people are just kind of like tough-nosed, angry sports fan kind of people. That's what people from Chicago are like. Our teams are usually really bad, and so that kind of creates just like a deep-seated toughness and anger. And then also, it's just like an ice age for about 5 months out of the year there. And when you have to go to the grocery store and like your nose hairs freeze, it just kind of like toughens you up a little bit. So there's just some like tough, Midwestern people from Chicago. After that, I moved down to Waco, Texas, which is a different kind of people. There we've got the tucked-in polo kind of people, the shine your boots, the people who go to church on Sunday morning, the Baptist pastor kids. Those are the people I encountered in Waco, Texas. And I actually, when I was at college at Baylor, I figured out that my friends and I, that we could go to a different church service at a different church every Sunday for all 4 years of college, and we would never repeat churches. That's how many churches there are in Waco, Texas. So after college, I moved up to Denver, and Denver is full of people from Chicago and Texas. That's what Denver is full of, right? So people from Chicago move to Denver because they want to, ski on the snow instead of shovel it, and a little sunshine in life would be nice. And so, you come here to kind of escape the harsh winters and find it a little bit nicer. And then people from Texas, they tend to move to Denver because they're trying to escape maybe some stuffy, old, traditional morality they grew up in, or maybe it was like the church they grew up in, or maybe it was their family and their family values. They just kind of want to come to Denver, where you just can experience freedom here, right? Like in Denver, there's no standard for how you're supposed to live. Like no one really cares about the job you have or the car you drive, right? No one really cares about the friends that you hang out with. In fact, if you just want to escape, you can just go to the mountains. Like, what's more free than being out in the wilderness by yourself, right? Like, we just have a free culture here. I mean, we legalized marijuana. We were the first state to do that. That's a freedom that a lot of states don't enjoy, right? And I would say that we have a culture here that's sort of like a you do you culture. It's like, hey, like, you can do whatever you want, and I can do whatever I want. Like, as long as we don't impose on each other's beliefs or freedoms or way of life, then we can all just get along well. That's kind of Denver. And yet, there's a kind of freedom that Jesus is talking about here in this passage that we actually don't get to automatically enjoy based on just where we live and what time we live in. Jesus envisions a different sort of freedom for our lives, one that we don't just have access to automatically. And so 2 questions that I want to answer for us this morning from this passage. 1, what are we freed from? Like what do we need to actually find freedom from? And 2, how do we get this freedom? So what are we freed from, and how do we get this freedom? First, look again at verse 34 with me. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin." All right, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Now, if that statement just kind of rubs you kind of wrong on first glance, just know that Jesus' audience would have been a little offended by this statement too, that everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. His audience was made up of Jewish folks, a lot of Jewish religious leaders at the time, and a Jewish religious leader would have never have considered themselves a slave to anybody. Like, as part of the nation of Israel, as part of the people of God, they would have never have considered themselves a slave. Now, in Israel's history, in fact, many times they did, in fact, find themselves enslaved. They were enslaved to Egypt, they were enslaved to Babylon, to Assyria. Even at this time, they were under Roman occupation when Jesus was saying this. And yet, theologically, they would have thought, we don't answer to anyone except for God. That was their understanding as the people of God. You can read just one verse back with me in verse 33. They answered him, "We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? And so they were offended by this statement. They would have never have considered themselves enslaved to anyone because their national identity meant that they served God and God alone. And we sort of think this way too as Americans, right? Like we're in the land of the free, home of the brave, America, right? We believe in life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Like our freedom is it is like engraved into our souls as Americans, right? We have freedom of thought, we have freedom of vocation. We generally believe that we have the ability to choose our own path. We're kind of taught this at a young age, like you can be anything you want. You can be any type of person you want. You ultimately form your own path in life. This is written into the fabric of our literature, of our art, of our entertainment. We're like the famous Victorian poet Henley who said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." By the way, this is like every Disney movie ever. This is like what it's about. Now, if you've seen Moana, I'm not going to knock Moana because I realize half of you will just stop listening to me. But this is the story of Moana. It's what is it about? Don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your ancestors. Ignore your traditions. Follow your heart. Right? That's like every Disney movie ever. And so this is deeply ingrained in us. And yet, Jesus says we're actually enslaved to sin. And we need to find freedom of it. We don't have as much power and control over our own fate as we think. Now, I know that sin is not the most popular topic, especially in our city. We don't generally love to talk about sin. And this is probably especially true for you if you say you're not a church person, if you don't regularly attend church, or maybe you sometimes come to church, but you're not really sure how you feel about it. Or maybe you're here today because somebody kind of dragged you here today and you're like, sin is probably one of the reasons that you don't like coming to church in the first place. Like, why are Christians so obsessed with sin? Like, who made them the moral police of this country? And why are Christians calling out everybody else on their stuff and holding others to their own personal standard? These might be objections you have to the topic of sin. But I think it's important before we just have all of those cultural assumptions about the word sin. I think it's important for us to understand what is sin according to Jesus? What is sin according to God? Because oftentimes, we have an incorrect or an incomplete picture of sin. We kind of think of sin as doing bad things, or having bad behavior, or kind of breaking traditional moral norms. I call this like the Footloose definition of sin, right? Like, the movie Footloose is like small Southern Baptist town, no drinking, no dancing, no holding hands. Like, this is kind of what we think about sin. And so it's like, yeah, we know that there's kind of these old traditional morals that we're not supposed to break, but like, it's kind of fun sometimes to break them, right? And this is what we kind of have the Footloose definition of sin. But this is an incomplete definition. The Bible defines sin as not just doing bad things or having bad behavior. The Bible defines sin as a power that affects every individual, and it prevents us from loving and worshiping the God who created us. You see, the biblical story goes like this. We were created to know God, to love Him, to worship Him alone, and He created us with His beauty, with His love, with His justice, that we might spread it over the face of the earth as ambassadors of God who created us, to live in relationship with Him and to worship Him alone. But sin is an attitude that exists in the human heart that resists God, that rejects our Creator, and that is an outright rebellion against Him. And as a result, instead of worshiping God, we worship other things in His place because our hearts are ultimately created to worship. And so we're going to worship something, and if it's not God, we'll find something else to worship. And so the power of sin has infected every single aspect of our lives and our world. It's like a curse, and our will bends to it. We obey it without even our own ability to choose. We serve it like a slave. This is just part of our human nature. Now, here's the main symptom of sin. Here's what it looks like. Instead of God sitting on the throne of our hearts, we make ourselves the center of the universe. Now, even if you're here today and you would call yourself a relativist, and so you don't believe in one objective moral standard that all people should follow, maybe you think morality is subjective to the individual or to culture, and morality shifts and changes based on what you believe. Even if that's you, you know that you don't live up to your own standard. Like, you may have created a morality of your own, but even that you have probably failed to live up to. G.K. Chesterton, the famous author and theologian, said that sin is the only part of the Christian theology which can really be proved, because we can just see it everywhere infecting our world. Now, as people who assume that we have free will and assume that we have freedom of thought and freedom of choice, we probably don't like the thought of this power controlling and coercing us to twist our desires in ways that we don't even want. Like, that's not like an enjoyable thought for us. You might outright reject that. But if you think about it, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, even psychologists, even secular psychologists will tell us that our decisions and our behaviors are shaped and formed by things oftentimes outside of our own control. So things like your family, your history, your environment, your genetics, all of these things you did not control, and yet they're actually determining where you go in life and the decisions and the choices that you make. And so oftentimes you think you're making a free will decision, but it's really being shaped by powers outside of your control. The Apostle Paul in Romans 7, he'll talk about this experience. Before he had found life in Jesus, he was a Jew who was like the most religious and righteous person who ever lived. And yet he would describe this experience in Romans 7. He says, "For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me." You know what he's saying here? When I have the desire to do something good, I don't have the power to carry it out. And yet when I don't want to do something evil, I find myself that being the very thing that I do. It's like he's being twisted and shaped in his desire from a force outside of himself. Now, these past couple weeks, I found myself being shaped and formed by a greater power outside of myself. And I had some time over the past couple weeks to really focus and to pray and to study. I had some time to spend with my wife and to go on a date with her and to be attentive to her needs and to what she needs. And yet I found myself being coerced by a greater power than myself called March Madness. And I just bent my will to it. And I had no choice. I was just, there was like 6 games on at once, and I didn't care about any of them, but yet I couldn't stop myself from watching them, right? And my team, we made the NIT tournament. That's the not important tournament. And yet I'm still watching the not important tournament instead of all of these things that I know would be good for the flourishing of human society. My wife, on the other hand, she finds herself drawn in and twisted by a much darker and more sinister power than even that. It happens every Monday between 7 and 9 p.m. This is a sick, twisted, sinful power called The Bachelor. And she just bends her will to it, ignores all else that goes on in society, reads the blogs, follows it. She's got brackets of her own. And bends her will to The Bachelor. Psychiatrists call this experience attachment. And they say that every single one of us is affected by it. Attachment is when our own selfish desires become compulsions that we aren't even aware of, like they sit below the surface. Or to put it as Jesus said, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. The other day I was in the grocery store. As I was checking out, there was a mom with her 2-year-old daughter behind me. And the 2-year-old, reached out for some candy in the aisle and began to pull it into the cart. And the mom kind of did the, no, sweetie, we're not going to have any candy today. And the 2-year-old bit her on the hand. I was like, what in the world? My 2-year-old just bit me. And is like, mom's kind of embarrassed but angry and is like lost all sense of shame. So is just yelling at her kid. And now what's going on in the mind of a 2-year-old in this moment? Like, what's she thinking about? Is she like, well, you know what would be great for the flourishing of society as a whole, and for my own good, and for my mother's good, and for everyone around me, and so that I could love my neighbor, is this candy. This would be delightful for me. No, she's not thinking about any of that. She's like, I want candy, I see candy, I grab candy, right? And when mom, an authority, says no, it's like, no, like lashes out and bites her. No one had to teach her how to do this. No one taught the 2-year-old that when someone resists your desire to want what you want, you bite them, right? I don't know. Moms, are you teaching no, you're not teaching your children how to bite you, I assume. It's just part of her nature. And our hearts are the same way. We resist any authority that would take from what we will and what we desire. We're born with this propensity. In Matthew 12:33, Jesus said this. He said, either make the tree good and its fruit, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. A tree that has rotten or bad fruit, the problem isn't actually with its fruit. The problem is with the tree. There's something wrong or there's something sick with the tree, and as a result, it produces a bad fruit. Our hearts are the same way. They act under the enslaving power of sin, and it produces bad fruit outside of even our own control. Now, during Jesus' time on earth, everywhere he went, he encountered people with a deep brokenness and deep patterns of sin in their life. But there was something about him that they were attracted to. Jesus was called the friend of tax collectors and sinners. Like sinners, people under the enslaving power of sin, they drew near to him because there was something about him where they thought, I could change. I could come back to God. And so think about the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is a tax collector, which means he's essentially stolen and robbed his neighbors to support the Roman occupation of his own Jewish people. And along the way, he's gotten rich off of his own greed and his thievery. And yet Zacchaeus, Jesus comes over to his house for dinner, and there's something about their encounter where Zacchaeus walks out wanting to give back 4 times the amount that he's stolen back to the people. Like his heart just is changed by this encounter with Jesus. Or think about this woman. She's described in the Bible as a sinful woman. She was a prostitute. She lived a life of prostitution. She comes to dinner where Jesus is eating, and she weeps at his feet, and she pours out her most expensive possession, an alabaster jar of perfume, because she'd encountered him in a way that had radically changed her life. Or there's the woman who touches the fringe of his clothes. She'd had a disease that had caused her to bleed for 12 years straight, and she thought, if I could just touch him, he would have the power to set me free from this thing that ails me, if I could just get near to him. And here's what it was about Jesus that attracted these folks to him. He didn't just address the outward behavior or their outward actions, but Jesus went for their hearts. See, here's often what's a misconception about Jesus. Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He didn't come to make immoral people religious. Like he didn't just come to give us more religion so that we could be better people or a new way of life or a new philosophy for us to follow. Jesus came with the authority to set sinners free. And so he can say, when the Son sets you free, you are free indeed, because he had the power and the authority to change hearts. So what I want to do now, for the next couple minutes, is I want to help each of us find out what are some ways that we might individually be manipulated and coerced by sin in our own lives? And how can we find freedom through Jesus Christ? Now, we're in a season of Lent as a church right now. Lent are the weeks leading up to Easter. And traditionally, Lent is a time of somber self-reflection as we await the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus at Easter. And so sometimes when we examine our hearts and we focus on sin and we look for patterns in our lives, it can be kind of a somber, heavy, weighty experience. But during this season, I just want to invite you guys in to do this, to do the hard work of examining your hearts. I just want to invite you into that, and it's okay if it's a little somber. And so I have 2 questions for you And how you answer these, one or both of these questions, will kind of help examine what are maybe a pattern of sin in your life that is controlling and manipulating you. The first is, what's the one thing in my life that I hold so dear I could never live without it? Like, what's one thing in your life that is so important to you and your identity that you can't even imagine what you'd be like if you didn't have it? So you could think about that. And secondly, what commands of God do I ignore or do I reinterpret to justify my lifestyle? So have you read something in Scripture or heard something from a pastor or a friend in your community and they've kind of pointed something out in you and you just outright reject it or kind of reinterpret it because it rubs against something in your lifestyle? How you answer those two questions could help reveal it. Now, I have some examples of what these things could be, and some of these might strike a chord with one of you. And by the way, even if you're a student in here, even if you're not an adult, if you're a child, like some of these things also can apply to you. And so I don't want you to just think of these things as adult things. Some of these seeds are planted already. So first, I have sort of I call these the college sins, with the outward things that we generally think of when it comes to this conversation. And these are things like substance abuse, like alcohol or drugs, or sexual brokenness or sexual addiction or addiction to pornography. Oftentimes, these things enslave us through powerful addictive properties. And I know there's probably many of us in here who have come out of a lifestyle of that, or maybe some of us who are still in a lifestyle of that. And so that might be what comes to your mind. But a lot of times, too, there's deeper below the surface stuff that's not as obvious or not as in your face. It could be something as simple as like being enslaved to your job. If this is the case, then a lot of times you've made success your God or performance your God. And so you have stress or long nights, or you have to, please your bosses at all costs because you have to serve work. Or maybe it's money. If it's your money, then comfort could be your God. And so there's all sorts of greed or attachment to material things, like putting too much stock in like a thing. Or maybe there's like a lack of generosity, like you just can't give because it's yours and you serve the God of money. Perhaps it's your self-image, where you worship the God of beauty or your own beauty. And oftentimes the symptoms of this can be eating disorders or insecurity or a fear of getting older or just kind of anxiety about what you look like on a day-to-day basis. That could be a sign that you serve your own self-image. Perhaps it's approval from other people, where you're looking for other people to approve you in a way that would fill kind of a void in your life. And so oftentimes you have to exaggerate your strengths or maybe hide your weaknesses or not show any vulnerability for fear of not being approved of and being rejected. It could be things like judgment, self-righteousness. It could be a relationship in your life that leads to obsession. It could be justice, like your own sense of personal justice, where unforgiveness ends up ruling your life, and so there's bitterness or hatred or anger. I just say some of these things because as I give you examples, I imagine something might prick your heart. Now, but I do want to point out this about some of these things I've listed. Notice how so many of them are actually good things, like work, money, justice, relationships. Like, these are good things given to us by God for our joy, for our flourishing. These are gifts from our Creator, and yet when we serve them over and above God who gave them to us, they enslave us, and we have to worship them. Now, I want us to remember, Jesus doesn't just free us from the symptom of our behavior. Jesus goes for our heart, and he saves us from the slave master itself. And so I want to move on to answering our second question. How do we find freedom? Read with me again, starting in verse 34. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Now, Jesus is using two images from the culture to teach them about freedom. This is the image of sons and slaves. Now, at this time, in the Greek market where you would buy and trade and sell, you could actually buy and sell slaves. Now, slaves at this time were a lot more like indentured servants. And so a slave would really just, their life would look like whatever their master wanted it to look like, but they could still enjoy a lot of privileges. They could have an education. They could actually have a higher socioeconomic status if that's what their master wanted for them. You know, they could work in a lot of different trades, but the key was they had to do the bidding and the will of their master, even if they could enjoy a lot of privileges associated with that. And they could be bought and sold at any point. And so you never really had this security in a house because you could be sold at any point. But a son can't be anything other than a son. A son enjoys all the legal rights of the household, of their father's household. And nothing at this time, nothing legally could take away that son's right to live in the house. And that's why he says, the slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. Now, if you were a slave, you could actually be set free, but somebody would have to purchase your freedom. At this time, being set free from slavery was called redemption. Redemption was the act, or being redeemed was the act of being bought out of slavery and given freedom. And so Jesus is saying that to find freedom from slavery, you need to be bought. Now, because it's sin that enslaves us, and sin is a power, and it's a power that leads to death, the price paid for our freedom needs to be precious, and it needs to be valuable. Friends, this is why Jesus died on the cross. When Jesus died on the cross, his death and his blood paid the price for our freedom. Paul the Apostle will say it like this in Romans 6, reflecting on the gospel and the power of the cross. He'll say that we know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. For one who has died has been set free from sin. He's saying that when Jesus died on the cross, his crucifixion, his death, paid the price for our freedom, so that when we trust in Jesus and connect ourselves to him, our body of sin, our heart that is twisted and manipulated and turned by this power against God, is ultimately crucified with Jesus on the cross. And in return, you are given a heart that worships and loves and pleases God. See, you're purchased out of slavery and brought into God's household as a son or as a daughter of the King. Now, the experience of being freed out of slavery and brought into God's household is called salvation. You're saved from the power of sin. So how is Jesus able to accomplish this? How is he able to do this? Now, on the cross, in the crucifixion story, there's a really interesting kind of paradox. There's an interesting irony happening around the cross. So there's three main parties that conspired to kill Jesus. There's the Jewish religious leaders, there's the Roman government, and then there's kind of the mob. And here's the irony of those three groups that conspired to kill Jesus. None of them are free. The only one who's free is the one nailed to the cross with the crown of thorns on his head. And here's why. The religious leaders, they ultimately served their own corrupt religious system. Read with me in verse 37. Jesus describes this to them. He says, I know that you are offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. See, Jesus delivered a word during his life that exposed the true nature of the religious leaders of the day. And while they had built a religious system that had put forth their own righteousness and their own outward image of moral goodness, inside their hearts were full of things like greed, neglect for the marginalized in their society, hypocrisy, judgment, pride. These were all hidden behind religion. And by the way, this is what's so dangerous about religion. This is actually what can even be dangerous about church, is that you can hide a heart of sin behind your goodness, or at least behind an image of goodness. And you can go to church and you can go to small group and you could pray and do Bible study. You could do all of these things, and yet you can be using those things to hide behind a heart that doesn't love and worship and know God. And this is what the Jewish religious leaders had done. And so they were serving their corrupt religious system. And they had to at all costs. And when Jesus came and he was a threat to it, they conspired to kill him. But Jesus, on the other hand, is free. His whole life, his will never bent in any way. All he ever desired to do was to please his Father. All of Jesus' life, he never turned or rebelled against his Father, but everything he did was in joyful obedience to his Father, even to the point of death and death on a cross, so that when he hangs there, he's done it out of his own freedom. He's done it out of his own love. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And so the blood of Jesus on the cross pays the price for our redemption, and it overcomes the power of sin in our hearts. It's a power called love, and it's a power called grace, given to us so that you can be forgiven fully, freely, and forever. And this is why, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. That's like saying, hey, if the Son sets you free, you really are free. Not a fake kind of freedom. You really are free. And you're freed up to love God with your entire heart, with your entire being. The me-centered life, the life that puts us at the center of the universe, is replaced by putting God at the center again, where he belongs on the throne of our hearts. And so even some of those things I've listed before, remember like the college sins, things like substance abuse or sex addiction or pornography, even these things which have powerful addictive properties, you can be set free from. In fact, addiction counselors, even secular addiction counselors, will tell us that there's a difference between sobriety and freedom. Sobriety often involves white knuckle change. You know what white knuckle change is? When it's like, I resist the temptation. I don't want to do it. You white knuckle your way through resisting that addictive property. But freedom is when you don't even want it at all. And it's not even tempting at all. And addiction counselors will actually tell us that spiritual connection can often be the thing that brings breakthrough in the life of an addict. And so even think about AA. The first step in AA is admitting that you are powerless over alcohol in your life. And the second step is admitting that there's a power greater than yourself, a spiritual power that can actually break you free. And so oftentimes it is spiritual connection that brings breakthrough. Now we offer a class, or not as much of a class as more of like a men's group on Sunday mornings here at the church called Out of Darkness. And I just want to mention this for you guys who have found yourself enslaved to pornography in your life. We want to help with that. And oftentimes a group of men where you can be honest and you can find spiritual breakthrough is what you need to be set free. And I know that there are people who have maybe lived in shame and been afraid to join something like this. Friends, I would invite you into Out of Darkness. Our head of pastoral care, Ryan Ramsey, he runs that group with a lot of grace and care. So I would recommend that to you, if that's you, to consider Out of Darkness and to reach out about that. So, but what about the deeper, below the surface stuff? Things like success. Like if you worship the God of success, when you look at the cross of Christ, you can see that you have nothing to prove. Like, it has accomplished everything you could ever need in this life. You've been brought into God's household as a son or as a daughter. You've been given the highest seat of honor. There's no greater thing that you can accomplish. Or what about comfort or money? Redemption, the price paid for your freedom, is the greatest gift and the greatest possession you could ever receive. It's bought you a relationship with your Father. There's nothing else you need. Or what if it's beauty? If it's your own self-image? The cross is definitive proof that you are more precious and that you are more beautiful than you could possibly imagine. Like if this is you, If you just find yourself enslaved to a negative view of your self-image, look to the cross and see how precious you are. Don't starve yourself. Let the insecurity go. It's proof that you are worthy. Or if it's your reputation, you've gone from being a slave to a son or a daughter. There's no greater honor than that. Or if it's self-righteousness, if you just find yourself stuck in self-righteousness and having to prove yourselves and judging others as a result, your goodness or your morality doesn't come from you. It's been given to you, not a righteousness of your own. It's been given to you by Jesus on the cross. He takes your sin. You know the verse, he took him who knew no sin, that he might become sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. Righteousness has been given from you. Sin has been taken from you. And so you've been given freedom from even that. Or if it's a romantic relationship in your life that is causing obsession and compulsion, romantic relationships are often imitations of what we truly long for, which is relationship with our Father. Every romantic relationship will pale in comparison with the love that you need from your Father, God. And so you can be set free from that because you've been given definitive proof of God's love for you by Jesus on the cross. And lastly, if it's unforgiveness, know that you have been forgiven of everything, past, present, and future. That ought to humble you and give you the ability to forgive even the worst injustice committed against you. And I could tell story after story in Christian history of Christians who have had an awful, awful injustice committed against them and have found the power to forgive their oppressor because of the cross of Jesus. The price has been paid. And what I've just been hoping and what I've just been praying for weeks now is that you would know that there is power in the cross to set you free. That I don't say these things to shame you or to make you dwell in your sin, but make you walk in the freedom that if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed, and you're free now to obey God. Now, obedience might sound like slavery to you. Obedience might sound like slavery, but I'm not talking about a slave kind of obedience. A slave obeys because you have to. It says, I have to, I have to, I have to. What I'm talking about is a childlike obedience. Remember, you've been given a seat in God's household. A child obeys because they get to. A few months ago, I was at a friend's house, and we were taking apart some furniture and moving it out of the house, and they had a 3-year-old daughter, and all she wanted to do was help, you know? And she just walked around with her little screwdriver and just kind of poked things with it, and they'd give her little things to carry up the stairs, and it just brought her joy and delight to serve her mom and her dad. Even growing up myself, I was like a really bad gift giver. Like as a kid, I was just like a terrible gift giver. I never gave anyone anything they wanted. I just had like a drawing, and here's a really bad drawing, and that's what you get, Mom. And yet my mom would never say that. She delighted in the gifts that I brought because I did it out of a heart that just wanted to please her. It brought me joy. That's the kind of obedience you're freed up to with God. You just want to please your Father. Now, all of us are going to experience freedom probably in different ways. For some of us, it could be a powerful act of God's grace, like a one-time thing in your life where you recognize what sin is enslaving to you, and you are honest with God, you open up yourselves, you pray for freedom, and just like a mighty, powerful act, His grace works in your life and sets you free from that sin. This has happened to tons of people I know. But oftentimes, that's not how it happens. And I would actually hope that for you. I would pray that for you, even today. Like even today, maybe at a prayer station during worship, or as you sing during our next 3 songs here in a minute, or as you take communion at the table, like maybe that could be your experience. But oftentimes, it's a much longer process of just constantly battling in our desires between choosing God and choosing the thing that enslaves us. And I can't tell you exactly why it's a longer process, but I know that during that process, God is teaching you of Himself. He's teaching you about Himself, and He's asking you to choose Him. And so for some of you, it'll be kind of a longer, maybe more painful process of letting something go and finding freedom in Jesus. An example of this is I know a 67-year-old man who shared his story with me. And when he was a young kid, he played baseball. And after a particularly bad baseball game where he had struck out, I think 5 times, his dad had just heaped tons of criticism on him. And as a result, there was a wound created where essentially he felt worthless and he felt rejected, and he carried around an insecurity with him that led to all sorts of patterns of sin in his life. And so he felt like he needed to prove his worth through work and found himself just working long hours, trying to please his bosses, cutting corners if he could, just trying to prove that he was worthy. He wasn't able to be vulnerable with his family because he was worried that he would be rejected as he felt like he was from his dad, constantly holding back love and affection from his family because he just didn't know how. He just couldn't show weakness. And at 67 years old, he did the hard work of applying grace to his former child wound and found a freedom in Jesus that he had never experienced before. And I watched as this man explained the joy and the rest and the freedom he got to experience because he'd done the hard work of looking at where his heart was bent. And friends, I would say it's worth it if that's you. In some way, it is worth it to do that hard work and to give it to God through a long process so that you can find freedom. It's the sweetest gift you will ever receive. And his redemption on the cross, given to you, does give you the power you need to find freedom. So I invite you into that. Would you pray with me now? God, I pray for my friends in this room and for myself, Lord, that you would move in a powerful act of your grace, even if it's painful, God. Even if it takes what feels like hard work on our end, that we would know that it's your grace carrying us through. I thank you for the redemption given to us by Jesus on the cross to set us free from sin and bring us into God's household as a son and a daughter. Pray this in Christ's name. Amen.